Um, that was fun. Thank you, guys. That was great. I love that. We're in a series right now. If you have been here with us for a bit, last semester we taught a series called The Way of Jesus. This semester we're teaching on practicing the way of Jesus. And the reason we do that is because Jesus made this statement and told this story that there was basically two different types of people in the world. And there are people who put his words into practice, and there are people who don't. And those who put his word into practice actually experience the added benefit and added blessing of what comes with following him. And those that don't put his words into practice don't experience that thing. And so we want to experience that. There's blessing and goodness and joy in following the way of Jesus. It also comes with hardship, but there's joy even in the midst of that in following the way of Jesus. And so we want to practice following the way of Jesus, and that's why we're doing this series. And so this next 6 weeks that we've been dealing with is basically how to spend time with him, because the people you spend time with are the people you become. And so for 6 weeks we've been talking about just how to spend time with Jesus. So last week we talked about reading the Bible and like spending time in his words. His words are actually still alive today. These aren't things that were written a long time ago but not done a long time ago. They're still for us. It's his word to us. And so hearing his words in us and through our eyes, in our ears, and that kind of thing, spending time with someone who's speaking to us. And then today we're talking about silence and just spending time and practicing this idea, this practice, this discipline of silence. And so we have 3 different texts today that are really launching points for this thing that give you an idea of where silence takes place in the Bible. And there's a lot, but I'm just going to read these 3. But this is Psalm 19, 1 through 4. David writes and says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them, yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world." In 1 Kings 19, the Lord said to Elijah, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a still, quiet voice. And then Luke 5 says, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. These is the word of the Lord. These are the word of the Lord. I realized the other day that I'm still scared of the dark. I'm 35, y'all. Should go away. Should be done being scared of the dark. But it started when I was a kid. My parents always made me take the garbage out, and it seemed like it was always like midnight when they're like, it's time to take the garbage out. And I'm like, it's midnight. It's so dark. This is when people die. Like, why do I have to do it now? And it was like, and also the garbage isn't by the house where it normally is. It's actually at the end of the street down there. So it felt like I was walking like a football field to get to it just out in the middle of nowhere. It felt like my parents didn't love me, is what it felt like. When really it was probably like from here to the door. It wasn't that far. But I just knew. I was like, man, I've seen enough scary movies. This is when someone dies. You send somebody out to do a very normal task. They do the thing. They hear a bump in the night. They look around, see nothing. On their way back, the guy kills them. I'm like, I know how this works. I've seen enough scary movies. And so I came up with this plan that what I noticed in the movies was that they normally waited to run from the guy or the monster or whatever. They waited to run from him when they saw him. And I was like, my idea is to run the entire time. Like, just start running and never quit running, and maybe it won't get you. And so as soon as I would open my front door, it was like, poof, I would just bust out of there, like garbage in hand, get to the thing, slam the garbage into the thing, and then take off running again, and then get to the door, and I'm like, and my parents were like, is there somebody chasing you? I'm like, probably. I don't know, though. They didn't catch me because I'm running the entire time. And that was my practice until later than I wish to admit. But like 17, I was like, around 18, I was like, I think I'm okay. Like, I think I'm fine. But, like, that's a thing. Like, I was afraid of the dark. And the dark, to do it, just scary. And so I grew up. I'm no longer afraid to take the garbage out. Still don't love it. But I'm no longer afraid to take the garbage out at nighttime. It's okay. But the other day, we were going to the lake with my family, and out the lake we go to, there's these things called the chalk mines, and it's this deep, cavernous cave that you basically crawl through a hole about this big into the mountain, into this cave. And for the first part, like the outside light is shining in on it, and you can see where you're going and stuff like that. But the further we kept walking, it's like me, my wife, and my son, the more we kept walking in there, it got so dark because there's no light. Like, it got so dark to the point I was like, put my hand in front of my face. I was like, oh, my goodness, I can't see my hand, like right here. I couldn't see the people around me. Like, we had our lights and stuff, but when we turned them off, it was like, this is crazy dark. And it was one of those things, like, I'm not scared. I'm not nervous of taking the garbage out anymore. But when it was that dark, all of those fears came back. I'm like, there's somebody in here. Everybody keep your eyes out. Eyes peeled. There's someone here we can't see them, but somehow they can see us. I don't know what it is, but they're going to get us. And so everybody on, like, Teddy's 6 years old. My son's 6 years old. I'm like, hold this knife. Like, we got to. He was fine. But it was funny, though. It was like, man, what I realized in that moment was that normally light illuminates something and helps you see something. But in this moment, the darkness illuminated something that light could never have touched. Like, the darkness brought out something and shed light on, oh, these fears are still real. These fears still exist. They're just deep down somewhere in grown-uphood, and you get it dark enough, and then all of a sudden those suckers come back fast. And the darkness just revealed that. And the reason I tell that story is because primarily, if you want to learn something or know something about yourself, normally people speak that to you. You hear it taught to you. There's something about the spoken word and people talking to you and that kind of thing and spending time with people. But there are just some things that are only revealed through silence. There are just like the darkness revealed that if put me in light, taking out the garbage, and I'm fine as a kid. Put me in light in a cave and I can still see, I'm fine. As soon as the lights go out, the darkness revealed something in me. And in the same way, take away the sound, and then all of a sudden, what can be revealed to you is very, very different than what's revealed to you when there is noise and when there is sound. Silence does something in you and reveals something in you. And so that's why we're talking about this. This is why, in many ways, this is why Jesus spent time going into the silence so often. So we're talking about the discipline of silence. And just so y'all know, this is what this is. The discipline of silence isn't something crazy. It's intentionally pursuing silence on your own, free from stimulation of people and technology, in order to listen to God, to hear from God, to pray, and to just keep company with Jesus. Those things. And so when we talk about this, I want to talk about three things that silence does for you that nothing else will do for you. Silence does something that sound doesn't. And the first one is this, that it reveals hidden things in us. Silence reveals hidden things in us. We all know this. We've all experienced this. If you've ever been texting somebody and you're texting them and it's fun, ha, 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 and then all of a sudden maybe you like this person and then you text them something a little more vulnerable like, hey, I think I'm falling in love with you. Hey, I think I like you. If they don't respond immediately, all of a sudden, if they respond, then you're like, oh, okay, good. I know how they feel. Even if it's like, no, I hate your guts, it's not going to work. At least it's a response. But in the silence, all of a sudden, all of these fears and anxieties and insecurities come like, oh my gosh, I scared them away. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that. And then you start thinking like, maybe I should send an emoji or a face or a JK or an LOL. I was like, I was just kidding. It's like I'm terrified in the silence. All of a sudden, you don't get the three little bubbles pop up, or you get the three little bubbles and then nothing comes. You're like, oh, it's over. It's over. Like everything goes away and everything in you, just something just rages in you, and it wouldn't come out. If they just responded, you would know what they think. But when they don't respond, what you learn is what you think about yourself. All of the fears of what could they possibly be thinking on the other side. And we think of all of these horrible, horrible things. If you've ever had this conversation with your parents, if they texted you or called you and you didn't text back or reply or answer their phone call, and then you get home and they're like, I thought you were dead. And it's like, why did you think I was dead? It's like, because our brains, in the silence, our worst fears come to reality. And it's like, oh, they're probably dead. They're in a ditch somewhere dead. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm with my friend. It's like, nah, in my mind, you're dead. And so there's just something about, like, in the silence, there's something revealed, and you had those fears in there. You had those insecurities in there. You had all of that stuff in there, and none of it came to the surface until there was silence. Until there was a lack of sound and a lack of words, all of a sudden what actually lives in there comes out, or at least it comes to the surface, and you start thinking the worst possible things you could possibly think. Silence reveals these things in us. And most of the time, we're able to kind of deal with those and push them down with noise and other things. We're really good at hiding them. They're there, but we can kind of distract ourselves. So we get on our phones. We play video games. We watch TV. We're texting. We're social media, whatever. We're just taking in content, and it's able to kind of distract our brains from actually thinking about the horrible things that we actually have living in us. And we feel like this is good. I'm dealing with it. And it's like, no, you're not really dealing with it. Distraction isn't the same as being delivered from something. You're just distracting yourself from actually thinking about it. And so the issue is when you distract yourself, the things are still there. You're just not thinking about them. You're not thinking about your fears or insecurities because you're constantly with your friends. You're constantly on your phone, or you're constantly listening to music. You're constantly watching TV. And you're able to escape from them, but they're still there. This is why all these clinical psychologists would say that anxiety in people, it peaks at nighttime. Because what they say is that it's the first time that you're actually alone with your thoughts. No one's talking to you. No one's texting you. No one's saying anything. No one's asking anything of you. There's not as many people posting or whatever. Like, there's just nothing else going on. And it's the first time that you're alone with your thoughts. And so all of a sudden, everything that you're able to think is able to get into your brain, and you're able to think it. And so anxiety peaks. This is why many of you stay up so late. This is why you fall asleep watching TV or on the phone or texting or with your phone in your hand, because you cannot deal with what actually lives in there. And so you're so used to distracting yourself and trying to push that stuff down so it doesn't come to the forefront of your brain, so that you don't stress out over it. The issue is, again, distracting yourself isn't delivering yourself from it. Using distractions to keep the stuff down doesn't actually save you from it. C.S. Lewis says this. He says, "We believe the lie that noise will save us from our worries, our despairing doubts, and that noise will save us from our impossible desires. The issue is distracting yourself doesn't make your problems go away. It just helps you to not think about them." And so the reason Jesus calls us, and there's this idea of practicing silence, is not so that, hey, I really want you to stress out all the time. It's so that when those things get brought up, and when you're able to actually figure them out and they come to the forefront of your brain, you're able to take those things and give them to the Lord, the way that the apostles said that, like, I am casting all of my cares on him. Everything that comes up. Instead of pushing it down with distractions, like, oh, I'm feeling a little insecure, I'm feeling whatever, so I'll go buy some more clothes, I'll do something to make myself feel better. No. Instead of that, as they're coming up, just give those things to him. The silence is revealing what's already there, and the idea is that as it reveals it, you're able to go like, oh, this lives in me, and I don't want this. I want to give this to you. Silence is supposed to reveal what's hidden so that you can ultimately give it to him, and then he can deliver you from it rather than distract you from it. Deliverance frees you from the thing. Distraction just keeps you stuck there. Silence keeps us from distracting ourselves, and it offers an opportunity for us to be delivered. The second thing that silence does is it helps us hear. Silence helps us hear quiet things. When it's silent, you hear things that you normally wouldn't hear if there was sound. Case in point. When we were praying here earlier, it was quiet, and then all of a sudden I heard a can get kicked over, and I knew someone spilled a drink before they had to tell me. I heard a toilet flush through this wall right here, which I normally wouldn't hear because I'd be talking. And I was like, someone's going to the bathroom. That's awkward. When it's quiet, when it's silent, you hear things that are quiet. It's just true. If you want to hear quiet things, you have to pursue silence, and you have to be intentional about it. This is why, again, Jesus didn't just do this once. He did this all the time, and this is why Richard Foster kind of gives us a list of like all the different things that Jesus did in silence. And so here's what he said. He began his ministry by spending 40 days alone in the desert. 40 days, solitude and silence. Before he chose the 12, he spent the entire night, the 12 disciples, he spent the entire night alone in the desert hills. When he received the news of John the Baptist's death, he withdrew from there in a boat to a lonely place apart. After the miraculous feeding of the 5,000, he went up into the hills by himself, following the long night of work. In the morning, a great while before day, he rose early and went out to a lonely place. When the 12 returned from a preaching and healing mission, Jesus instructed them, come away by yourselves to a lonely place. Following the healing of a leper, Jesus withdrew to the wilderness and prayed. With the 3 disciples, he sought the silence of the lonely mountain as the stage for the transfiguration. As he prepared for his highest and most holy work on the cross, Jesus sought the solitude and silence of the Garden of Gethsemane. This is what Jesus does. He wanted to hear the quiet voice of his Father. He understood that God could, if he wanted to, he could shout down every noise and every sound and be louder than anything if he wanted to. He just doesn't choose to speak that way. He primarily chooses to speak, as 1 Kings 19 said that we read earlier, in a still, quiet voice and a gentle whisper. This is how God chooses to speak. And Jesus wanted to get away from the crowds of people following him, from all the distractions, and get to this place of solitude and silence so he could hear the still, quiet, gentle whisper of his Father, reminding him who he is, having words for him, telling him what's coming up next, and preparing him for all. He wanted to hear the words of his Father. God chooses to speak quietly because it forces us to pursue him in order to hear him. If he shouted at us, we could be very, very far away. But he doesn't want that. He actually wants to be close to us. Think of somebody who's whispering to you, and you want to hear what they have to say. If they're whispering to you, you have to get closer, and sometimes you have to like really put your ear up to their mouth so that you can hear it. You have to stop talking. That's also a thing you have to stop doing. You have to tell everybody else to shut up. You have to shut everything down and mute TVs and turn off music and all this stuff. If you want to hear somebody whisper, you have to get very close. And that's the relationship that God wants with you. Why would he ever shout to you when the relationship he wants with you is very, very close? He wants a close one, an abiding one that's so tight that you can't get away. Like, he wants to be so near to you. Why would he ever shout? He wants to whisper because he knows that when he whispers, and the people who want that too, they will get so close, they will draw near to him, and he will draw near to them. He will draw near to him, and he will draw near to them. I may have said it wrong again. But the point is that we have to get to this space that God actually wants us to get to, and Jesus understood that. He's going to whisper because it's the relationship that he wants with us. Thomas à Kempis said, in quiet and in silence, the faithful soul makes progress. The hidden meanings of Scripture become clear, and as one learns to grow still, one draws closer to the Creator and farther from the hurly-burly of the world. I love that. If you want to hear God speak, you have to pursue silence. Some of you have talked about this. You've prayed about it. You've complained about not hearing God speak, and I understand that. That would be very frustrating, but there is something to this idea that, like, Jesus spent a ton of time. This isn't something he did once. This was a regular practice of moving into silence, removing every distraction, anything out of the way. They didn't have cell phones back then, but if he did, he would have left it with Peter or John. Mark probably would have lost it. But anyway, that's what he would have, every distraction. And he would have been spending time with his Father. And the same idea, if you want to hear God speak, if you want to hear his words for you, if you want to hear the song that he's singing over you, if you want to be encouraged in that way, he whispers in a gentle, still voice. That's the second thing. The third thing is that silence leads us to experience things that we miss when we're distracted by noise. We will experience other things that if we just had noise going, we'd miss those things. I had one friend that I almost dated who was, when I first moved here, and I'll tell you why we didn't date at the end. She didn't choose me, but one of the things that when we met, we were hanging out at this party, and we were eating food and hanging out, and I met her, and I was like, oh, she's cool and kind of cute. And so I was talking to her about stuff, just life or whatever, and we were just having a conversation. But I noticed that, like, as we kept having the conversation, I would ask certain questions, and, like, it would be like she didn't hear me at all. Like, she would just I'd ask a question, and she wouldn't say anything, and then move on to another conversation. Or I'd ask a question, she wouldn't answer, and then she'd ask me a question. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess my question wasn't that interesting. Like, I don't know how this is going. And I started to get frustrated. And then finally, as I was eating, I was eating whatever I was eating. I put it in my mouth, and I was still talking to her, and I asked her another question, and I was putting my hand in front of my face so that, like, she wouldn't see the food I'm chewing while I'm still talking to her, because I was, again, wondering, like, I don't know if we're going to date, but I don't want you to see how I eat. That kind of thing. So I had my hand here, and she reached out, grabbed my hand, pulled my hand down. She goes, I'm reading your lips. I'm deaf. And I was like, oh, like, it makes so much sense. I had been talking to her the entire time, sometimes like this, and then I take a bite of food, and I talk to her like this. She got this. She did not understand what I was saying when I did this. I had no idea. When she said that, I was like, oh, my goodness. You can read lips. And she's like, yes, I can read lips, and not when you do this. And I was like, oh, really sorry about that. And I kept doing it. Like, I'd take a bite and be like, oh, I'm sorry. I need to put this in my pocket or something. But it was this really interesting thing. Like, it was like we talked. We became friends, and we did not date. She ended up dating someone who also was deaf, and that makes a lot of sense. But we started talking, and she was just explaining life. And obviously, she was like, I would love to hear worship music again. I would love to hear again. She's like, but I know what those people all the way over there are saying, and you can't hear them. I can read their lips, and I know what they're talking about, but you can't hear them. She's like, but you can not look at me and know what I'm saying because you can hear me. And so it's just different. She's like, and the idea was she just experiences the world very differently because of the silence that she experiences in her ears. And it was really interesting. And so Lawrence Kushner, this rabbi, talks about this idea that when there is silence, you just experience things differently. If you watch a movie that has sound, that's great. If it all of a sudden you're in the movie theater and it shuts off, then all of a sudden you go immediately to the lips and go, then you try to read the room by context. It's like, what's happening now? It's Doctor Strange. I don't know what's happening. You're just trying to figure it out. But when there's sound, you just experience the world differently. So Lawrence Kushner talks about this idea of what life looks like when we practice silence. And he talks about it with Moses and the burning bush, if you remember that story. I've read this before, but I think it applies here. He says, in the ancient Near East, where Moses was, it was not uncommon to see bushes that would spontaneously combust into fire. Because of the heat and the chemicals in the trees, bushes would catch fire. But how long would you have to watch wood burn before you knew whether or not it was being consumed? Even dry kindling takes several minutes to burn up. This then would mean that Moses would have to watch this amazing sight for several minutes before he could possibly know that there was even a miracle to watch. Therefore, the burning bush was not as much a miracle as it was a test. God wanted to find out whether or not Moses could pay attention to something for more than a few minutes. When Moses did, then God spoke. The trick is to pay attention to what is going on around you long enough to behold the miracle. And then John Ortberg follows this up by saying, Moses thought, I must turn aside to look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. And he says, everything turned on Moses being willing to turn aside, to interrupt his daily routine and pay attention to the presence of God. He didn't have to. He could have looked the other way, as many of us would, but he would have missed the Exodus, the freeing of his people, the people of Israel, his calling. He would have missed the reason for his existence. And as I was reading, I was like, man, what if his phone would have buzzed? What if he had a phone and it was like, and all of a sudden he's looking at the burning bush and he's like, hold on. And then he starts checking his phone. Like, what if he had a friend there that was like, started talking to him, was like, oh, burning bush, that's cool. Every friend does this. They want to one-up your cool story. Like, yeah, I've seen trees on fire before. You should have seen this one time. It's like, shut up, man. I'm watching a burning bush here. But if he had people in his life or something to distract him, he would have been looking at this thing and been like, oh, somebody liked my post. Cool. And then a sheep would have bought or fell off or something. He's like, dang it, sheep, And then he would just leave. And I think that happens so much. I think God is sitting there going like, I just some silent time. But there's something that exists that's available to you. If you'll just give me some time here, I will speak to you differently. You'll experience life differently if you'll just give me that time. The silence and the nothingness of what Moses was dealing with. He was in a desert looking at nothing, just nothing to do. It slowed him down, and it gave him the opportunity to go, will you just sit here and stare at a bush burn? And because there was silence and solitude, he was like, what else am I going to do? And we need to practice, what else am I going to do? Just wasting time with God. And just going like, look, I'm just here. I have no agenda. I have nothing. I'm just showing up. I'm not going to bring my phone. I'm not going to do anything. No distractions. I just want to pay attention to the presence of God. When that happened, God spoke to him. It changed Moses' life, and I think it'll change ours. Henry Nouwen says this. He says, without silence and solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. It begins with a time and place for God and for him alone. If we really believe not only that God exists, but also that he is actively present in our lives, healing, teaching, and guiding, we need to set aside a time and space to give him our undivided attention. And the beauty of this is that it's not something that's like professional level. A 3-year-old can be silent and a 100-year-old can be silent. Anybody can practice it. It's difficult and it takes intention, but it does not require any money to be quiet. It requires none of that. But it is something that requires intention. And Jesus is inviting us in silence. He's inviting us to go like, look, I'm inviting you just to be silent for a bit, to experience something here. It will reveal things in your heart that need to be revealed so that I can deal with them and so that you can give them to me. It will help you to hear God's voice because that's what you long for, because in his presence is fullness of joy and you long for that. And it will also help you to experience something brand new that you won't experience if you just continue to pop in the AirPods, listening to the thing, the video games, the TV. Like, you can experience life that way, and I think you can find God that way. But there's something other than that that's available to you in the practice of silence, and I want you all to experience that. So, real quickly, here's how you practice that. If you're like, great, sign me up, I'm ready, let's do it. practice getting still. Still is an acronym, okay? Practice getting still. Here we go. S stands for space. Just find a space, a room, maybe on a walk in a park. Emma does that. A space that's distraction-free, just nothing there, distraction-free. Find a space that's distraction-free. Then time. Find the most consistent time for you. Find a time that you're like, I can keep this time. This is time that's never messed up. This is always the right time because there's nothing going on at this time. Pick the most consistent time. It might not be 100%, but this is like a time that you know nothing's going to distract me here. Pick the most consistent time. Interruptions. Remove interruptions. Put your phone away. You're like, I need that to pray. No, you don't. You don't need it to pray. If you don't know what to pray, that's fine, but your phone won't help you. It's not going to be there for you. You don't need it for time. You just don't worry about it. If you feel like you went too long, stop. If you feel like you need to go further, just go. Let your mind be your clock. Just you don't need your phone. No music, no background noise, no background music, nothing. Just spend some time wrestling with the silence, but remove every interruption. If it's your little brother, remove him. I don't know what you got to do. Just make it happen. Length. Length is the first L. Set a goal for your time. If you've never done this before, I wouldn't set 30 minutes as your goal. I love you and I love the ambition, but that won't happen. You need to set a goal that's challenging but doable. And so if you're barely starting out, like a 60 seconds of silence and just being quiet is really, really great, and seeking to hear from the Lord. 5 minutes is even better. And do something that does stretch you a bit, but doesn't make it impossible, because if it stretches you a bit, that's good. That's called following Jesus. If it makes it impossible, that means that you've set a goal that you'll never do, and you'll never actually get to practicing it. Because that's like saying, like, I'm going to hike Mount Everest. And it's like, are you going to go there? Like, probably not. It's really expensive. Like, okay, then that's a bad goal. Like, don't do that. So set up an appropriate length that's challenging but doable. And then listen. This is all you do in your time. Just listen for God's voice. You can ask him to speak to you if you want. Lord, speak to me, and then just listen. Listen for the still, quiet voice. It takes time. You're learning to hear from the divine. It takes time. Listen to your own thoughts, because what will happen is all these thoughts that you haven't thought about because you've been distracted, all of them will come to your brain, and you'll feel like, I'm getting distracted from this quiet time I'm trying to do, but you're not. Those distractions coming up are exactly what silence does. Don't be upset about them. Don't let them get you discouraged. Use them. Turn your distractions into prayers. When you're thinking, you're sitting there in silence, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got that paper I need to write. Lord, help me with that paper. You don't have to pause what you're doing. It doesn't have to stress you out that you have that paper, but it's a thing that came to your brain that you're able to give to him. As it comes up to your brain, just send it a little further and take it to him. If it's like, oh my gosh, I need to call so-and-so, pray for them and lift them. What came to my mind was like this person that's mad at me, or my relationship. Just continue to lift those things as the distractions and the things come up, the worries, the anxieties, whatever, in that silent time. As your mind is flooded with things, take those flooded things and just flood him with them. He wants them. We don't have the capacity to carry them, but he does. And so give those things to him. So find a space that's distraction-free, a time that's consistent for you. Remove the interruptions. Pick an appropriate length for those threes in the room, and then listen. Just spend time listening to God's voice. We're going to practice this in small group. We're also going to practice it now after I pray. So after I pray, there's be some stuff on the screen that I'm going to encourage you to just practice this. It's going to be quiet and still. Take your Skittles, your cans, whatever. Just take them, put them out of your hands. Just hands open, palmed, whatever. But just use this time for practicing getting still. This is your space. This is your time. Seek to remove the distractions and other things around you, your phone, all that stuff. The appropriate length, it's going to be a little bit, I will dismiss you. And then just listen. Ask the Lord to speak to you as we begin. I'm going to pray, and then we'll start. Father, thank you that you call us to something realistically that's so simple. And you said, like, your presence dwells in the quiet, and it dwells in the silence, and that's how you long to speak to us, because you just desire to be near us. You want to whisper so that we will have to get so close to you because you love us that much, just so that we'd be so close that we could hear your voice. God, I pray that you would help us to develop this in our own hearts and our own lives. God, would you give us grace to practice this beautiful, beautiful thing where you'll show us and tell us things that we wouldn't hear otherwise. In Jesus' name, amen.